When you start a new business, one of the very first and most fundamental choices you have to make is how to structure it. Should you be a corporation or maybe a partnership? Today, we're going to dig into that exact question using a real-world case study to show you how this choice can have some really surprising consequences. Okay, so let's jump right in. Our case involves two companies, Krisco and Brandi. They're teaming up to launch a brand new clothing line. And right out of the gate, they're facing what is probably one of the most critical decisions they'll make. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the basic dilemma they're facing. Then we'll get into the real nitty-gritty, how taxes work when you're making profits versus when you're taking losses. We'll even stress test the options and see what happens if the business fails completely. After that, we'll look at how they can actually get their money out of the venture. And finally, we'll pull it all together to find the best possible structure for them.
All right, first up, let's meet the players in this joint venture so we can get a really clear picture of the challenge they're up against.
Okay, so what we have here are two companies coming from completely different places. On one hand, you've got Krisco. They're doing great, profitable, with a healthy $6 million net worth. But then you have Brandi. They've also got a decent net worth, and this is absolutely crucial, they're sitting on $2 million in past business losses. That little detail is going to be the key to understanding why these two partners have very, very different ideas about how to move forward. And if you look at their projections, well, it's a pretty classic startup story, isn't it? They fully expect to lose money for the first 3 years to the tune of $800,000 in total. It's only in year 4 that they expect to finally turn a corner and start making a profit. And believe me, this initial phase of losses is where the real fight over the business structure begins. All right, so we've got the players, we've got the projections. Now let's get into the really interesting part, the tax impact. We're going to look at what happens in those early lean years versus the later profitable ones, because this is where you'll see just how different these two structures really are. Okay, let's fast forward to when the venture is actually making money. If they set it up as a corporation, you can think of the new business as its own separate person in the eyes of the taxman. This means it gets its own tax breaks, like the small business deduction. The result? A super low tax rate of just 13% on its first $500,000 in profit. Now, compare that to a partnership. Here, the profits flows straight through to the partners. For a company like Krisco, which is already profitable, that new income gets taxed at their full corporate rate, which is about 27%. The difference is huge. And that difference in tax rates, it's not just pocket change. By choosing to be a corporation, the venture saves up to $70,000 in taxes every single year. I mean, that's 70 grand of extra cash they can use to grow the business or pay out to the owners. When you're just looking at profits, it's a no-brainer. The corporation wins. But what about those first 3 years? Those years of losses? Well, this is where the tables completely turn. In a corporation, those $800,000 in losses are essentially trapped. They're stuck inside the new company and can only be used to offset future profits from this specific venture. But in a partnership, oh, it's a whole different story. The losses flow directly to the partners, and they can use them right away to lower the tax bill on their other businesses. For a profitable company like Krisco, this is gold. Their half of the losses, that's $400,000, can be used immediately to shelter their other income. And that generates real, cold, hard cash savings of about $108,000 over those first 3 years. That's cash in their pocket right when the new venture needs it most. So you see the problem, right? It's a direct conflict. For Krisco, the partnership is the clear winner when they're in that high-risk startup phase, but the corporation is the obvious choice once the business is successful, and you just can't have it both ways. Okay, this leads us to the question that, honestly, nobody likes to ask, but every entrepreneur has to. What happens if this whole thing just fails? Let's take a hard look at the downside risk if that entire $2 million investment goes up in smoke. So let's imagine the worst-case scenario. The business burns through all the cash and has to shut its doors. Both partners are out their $1 million investment. The big question is, how much of that painful loss can they actually get back through tax savings? And does the business structure make a difference? Oh, you bet it does. Okay, let's trace Krisco's $1 million loss, because this is where it gets really telling. In a corporation, their investment loss is treated as a capital loss, and for tax purposes, you can only deduct half of that. So a $500,000 deduction at their 27% tax rate gets them a tax refund of $135,000. Their actual out-of-pocket loss is $865,000. Now look at the partnership. The entire $1 million operating loss flows through to Krisco,
At that same tax rate, that creates a tax shield of $270,000, literally double the savings. Their net cash loss drops to just $730,000. The partnership cuts their real-world losses by an extra $135,000. So the partnership offers a much better financial safety net if everything goes wrong. It seems like a clear win for managing risk, right? Well, not so fast. The partnership comes with a very big and potentially very scary catch. And that catch is called unlimited liability. See, in a corporation, your risk is generally limited to what you invested. But in a general partnership, the partners themselves are personally on the hook for all of the business's debts. This means if the venture owes a ton of money and Brandi can't pay its half, creditors can come after Krisco's entire $6 million net worth. Everything. Now, there is a common workaround for this. Each partner can set up a separate holding company, and those two companies become the partners in the venture. That little trick contains the risk and caps the liability at the $1 million they invested. But it's a classic case of solving one problem only to create another. Now the losses are trapped inside those holding companies, which have no other income. So you've just negated the partnership's biggest tax advantage in those early years. Okay, let's switch gears for a second and look at another really practical issue. Once the venture is actually making money, how easily can Krisco and Brandi get those profits back into their own company bank accounts? Remember that super low 13% tax rate for the corporation? Well, that makes a huge difference here. It makes the corporation way more efficient. After the venture pays its small tax bill, a whopping 87% of the profit can be paid out to Krisco and Brandi as a tax-free dividend. Compare that to the partnership, where the profits get hit with Krisco's high tax rate, leaving only about 73% of the cash to be distributed. The corporate structure just leaves more money on the table for the owners, plain and simple. All right, so we've been back and forth, haven't we? A corporation is better for profits and gives you limited liability. A partnership is way better for using those early losses and softening the blow of a total failure. This brings us to the final weigh-in, and this is where we uncover a really interesting surprise. Now, this is where we can really flip the script on what risk actually means. We already calculated that if the corporation fails, Krisco's net loss is $865,000. But look at this. Because the partnership's tax shield is so much more powerful, the venture could actually lose almost $1.2 million. That's $185,000 more than the total investment, and Krisco's net after-tax loss would still be the exact same $865,000. Think about that. The partnership provides a much, much larger financial cushion against failure. And there's another crucial factor here. It's not just about how much you save, it's about when you get the money. The tax savings from a partnership show up immediately, year after year, giving you cash flow relief right when a startup is most desperate for it. The tax benefit from a failed corporation, that might not arrive for years, only after the company is officially dead and buried. And cash now is always better than cash later. And just when you think it's complicated enough, let's not forget about Brandi. Remember those $2 million in old losses they're carrying? For Brandi, the partnership is actually better even in the good years. Why? Because their share of the venture's profits can be completely wiped out by those old losses, meaning they pay zero tax. And this creates the perfect storm. Krisco wants a corporation for the profitable years to save tax, while Brandi wants a partnership for the exact same reason. So it all comes down to this, doesn't it? The corporation offers lower legal risk, protecting the partners behind that wall of limited liability. But the partnership, despite its legal exposure, provides a much stronger financial safety net through its tax treatment of losses. It forces us to ask a really fundamental question. When we think about risk, are we more worried about the legal danger we might face or the actual value of the financial safety net that's there to catch us when we fall? As this case clearly shows, the safer option isn't always the most obvious one.